Hi everyone, it's Rich. Just trying to start my screen share. So I've had to re-record, I wanted to re-record the lesson 3 video. So this is all about selecting data. I know in the old video I recorded it last year, the audio and video is a bit out of sync, so I wanted to re-record it so we can go through our activity 2 today. So I want to take a look at a couple of websites, some of the ones I go to every day. So when we look at these pages, pretty much, pages that we see every day, almost all of the content on all these pages is actually dynamic. So for example, on Globe and Mail, we have a static header, we have a static footer, but pretty much everything in between, all the links, all the videos, all the articles, all of this stuff is dynamic content. So each day, or even through the day as we come back, we're going to get content that's coming out of the Globe and Mail's database. So when I click on an article, it gives me dynamic content, the photo, the title, the author, the dates, video content, all of this stuff comes out dynamically. When I look on Amazon, for example, and pull up something, here's a book I'm reading right now, actually. So our header is mostly static, but all of the content, so the image, all the information about this product, the pricing, the related products, all of these things, the description, and all the reviews and comments and categories, all of this is dynamic content coming out of the Amazon database. Really, only down at the bottom do we see mostly static content. Here, if we go on Facebook, which I'm sure some of you are logged in right now, again, we see a mostly static header, although even a few dynamic elements like my avatar, my number of notifications, my contact list. And then down at the bottom, we have another little small static page. Virtually everything else here is dynamic and changes depending on which Facebook profile we're looking at. So this big focus of our course is learning how to make dynamic web pages using server-side scripting. So in each case, all 3 of these pages are selecting data from the database, but they really just are packaging or wrapping the dynamic content in different HTML tags. So here on Globe and Mail, the content is largely just displayed as HTML text. On something like a Facebook photo album, we're getting lists and images from the database, but each one of these is wrapped or packaged inside of an HTML IMG tag. I like to think of it as similar if you were invited to a dinner party and you're going to take a bottle of wine. There's different ways you can take that wine to the party. You could carry it in your hand, you could put it in a box, you could put it in a gift bag, you could wrap it in newspaper. It's really the same bottle of wine inside, but you're using different packaging or different wrapping around it. In the case of all of these web pages, we're getting content being selected from a database, displayed in a browser, and we're just using different HTML tags in terms of how we present or view the data. So that's really the subject of today's lesson. So what we want to do, we're going to build several dynamic pages that work with our movies table in our database. Now, I'm going to work on my local MySQL database today. You can work with your DreamHost database wherever you've already set up your movies table. So I've just connected in MySQL Workbench. You're familiar with should be getting familiar with this tool now from your relational database class. So I've run the use command, and I've just run a select query to go and list the movies in my database. So what we want to do first thing we want to do is build a simple page that will simply display these movie titles on the page. Then our second step is we're going to build out a grid, so an HTML table of rows and columns to display this data in this kind of format, but we want to display it in our browser. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go into my COMP1006. I'm going to make a week 3 folder for today. And then I'm going to open up my PHP Storm code editor. And first we're going to make a very simple page, no structure, no real formatting to it. We're just going to, we want to connect to our database, select it, the list of movie titles, print them on the screen, each one on a new line. So I'll open up my folder. Again, you can be using any code editor that you like. You don't have to use PHP Storm for this. So I'll open up my week 3 folder. And I'm going to create a new PHP file, which I will call movie titles. My code editor is going to set up this extension. I'll change the title of my page to say movie titles. And I'll take out that. Okay. So now I basically have a blank page. If you're working with DreamHost or you're working with Azure, you can upload your file to a week 3 folder on the web server so that you can check and make sure that it works. So I'll just check mine. Browsing to my local host, which I'm running on port 800. I should get a blank page, which I do. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add some PHP tags and write a block of PHP code that will connect to our database, run this SQL query, fetch the results, and then programmatically we're going to need to use a loop to output each movie title to the page. And lastly, we're going to want to disconnect. So inside of my body, I'm going to put on a set of PHP tags. PHP Storm automatically creates the closing tag for me. So before we write any of the actual server-side code, what we're going to do is let's put on all the comments. Let's go through all the steps we're going to need. So first, we're going to need to connect to the database. Second, we'll write the SQL query to fetch the movie titles. And we'll execute the query, store the results. We'll loop through the results and display each title on a new line. And lastly, when we're done with that set of data, we can disconnect. We always want to disconnect because web servers, they only allow so many concurrent connections between a web browser and a database. So if our site gets really busy and we leave those connections open, they'll time out eventually, but it's going to slow down our system a lot when other users are making requests that require our database. So we did do a connection last week. So I'm going to use the same variable. I'll create a variable called connection, and I will create a new PDO connection. So my host is going to be localhost. If you're working on DreamHost, you'll use sql.computerstudies. So we'll put in our credentials here. Now we'll set up a variable for our SQL query. And it doesn't really matter if I use single quotes or double quotes. Probably easier with SQL queries to use single quotes. Now we're going to set up command object. Command will be the PDO object that actually executes our SQL statements. Doesn't matter if they're select, insert, update, or delete. So we'll take our connection object and we'll call the prepare method. We'll use our existing connection from line 11, our existing query from line 14. We'll create a new command using those two, and we'll prepare then we call the execute method. Now our query has no parameters. We use this command because if we did have parameters like a where clause, rather than writing that inline, we can pass in parameters which helps prevent SQL injection and provides data type safety. We'll talk more about that in later weeks. So line 18, that actually executes the SQL command, and it will fetch the data and return it into an array called movies. So now we're going to use a loop, and in PHP most of the time we're going to use a for each loop. So we'll call each movie a movie. We're going to loop through our array of movies. For each loop is probably something you've seen previously. So again, movies is the entire collection, and movie is a single movie. So what we want to do inside of each loop is we want to print out the title field. And then, because we don't want all the movies to be printed across the page, we want a blank line. We want to append on an HTML BR tag. So this should give us the movie title and then a line break. And lastly, to disconnect, we just set our connection to null. We're connecting, setting up a query, preparing and executing that query, storing the results, then we're going to loop through. So in effect, we have two arrays. Movies is an array, it's a multi-dimensional array, all the rows fetched in our query and all the columns. And the movie, singular, that is a single row of our movies array. And then we can refer to each column either by its name or by its index. Generally, we use the column names because it's more descriptive than, say, using $movie0 or $movie1. So you can save that change if you're working on Azure or DreamHost. Make sure you upload your file. Come back to my browser and we'll try it out. Okay. I just need to check my connection. Stop my screen share for just a moment. Oh, I did miss a step in the code. So let me just back up. So we're going to call execute. We're going to move this line. So we execute the query. But we're going to call the fetch all method. That was the step we missed. So prepare, execute, and then call fetch all. If we only are fetching a single record, we can just call fetch, and we'll store that in our movie0. Let's try that again. And we also need to change it. We also don't want to select star. We should be selecting just the title. Whoops, I had this wrong, sorry. Movies should be the whole collection, and movie is our individual. So we're filling our array called movies, and we're calling each one a movie. So now we get the movie titles displaying on our page. Now it's important, notice in my database, the word title is lowercase. If I use a capital T instead, now we're going to get different results depending on the configuration of our web server. So capital T title doesn't exist. When I run this, I just get nothing. I don't get an error, and you'll notice the same thing when you run it on DreamHost or on Azure. You're probably not going to get an error, but you're not going to get any data showing up. So this is where it's important to remember that all these objects are case sensitive in PHP. So sorry for the hiccup there. Our page is done. So there's our first dynamic web page where we're selecting data. And if we view the source of the page, you can see our BR tags getting appended on at the end of each movie title. So this page is complete. What we want to do now is create another version of this page that not only displays the movie title, but it also displays the year, the length, and the URL. Then we want to format our URL and make it a link. We want to put this in a table, a grid of rows and columns. Now we see this commonly. Going to be a common example of an HTML table. So we use rows and columns where we have tabular data. We want to display data in a simple grid so it's easy to see. So very common page. For example, we can click on here and sort, which is something we're going to be able to do with our movie list later on in the course. We're also going to add some formatting today. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add a new PHP file. I'm going to call this one movies. So again, I'll put a heading of movies. In my body, we'll open a set of PHP tags. And again, let's write the comments. So we're going to do similar process. We're going to connect, set up the query, run the query, for the results. We'll create the table heading. And we're going to loop through the data. A new row. We're going to do all the same things we did previously, but we're going to add in an HTML heading, HTML at the bottom, HTML table, and this time we're going to wrap the data into a grid of rows and columns. So our connection is going to be the same. Yes, well, it's true it's not that efficient to repeat our connection from one page to another. We'll learn how to share that line later on, but for now I want you to type it so that you get used to what the PDO connection string looks like. We're going to connect. We'll run a similar query. This time we do want to select star rather than just selecting the title, which was all we needed for our first page. We're going to use star. We'll execute the query and store the results in the exact same way. I'll do it right the first time this time. Go set up a command object. In PHP, you'll notice this is object-oriented PHP. Our connection object has a prepare method, but it doesn't use dot notation like Java, C#. and most other languages. Object-oriented PHP uses this star greater than instead of a dot when we're referring to object in a method or an object in a property. Our command object has an execute method. Now we'll create our movies result set, and we'll call the fetch all method of our command object. So far, this code is identical to what we did on the previous page, with the exception of what we're selecting in our query. Now we want to create a table header. So first, we're going to use an echo. And I want to put it in single quotes because I'm going to add some HTML with some attributes inside, and those attributes need to be in double quotes. And we're going to create a heading row. Finish that with a semicolon. And in here, we want 4 headings. So we're going to use TH for table heading. Our 4 headings will be title, year, length, URL. For getting those, we don't want to show the movie ID. We're just going to have that for internal purposes. Our users don't need to see the ID numbers. They're not meaningful. But we do want the title, the year, the length, and the URL. We can go down to the bottom. When we're all done looping, we're going to close our table. And we're going to disconnect. We can try this out. We can see how it looks so far. All we should see is a table with some headings. And hopefully we've got no errors. So this is what we've got so far. There's our table. But now we need to add our loop to display the data. So we're going to use a for each loop. I'll do it right this time. So we're going to loop through our movies. We'll call each individual record a movie. And now what we want to do is we're going to need to create a new TR, an NTR, and then a set of TD tags for our 4 columns inside the new row. So we're going to open a new row, open a new column. Then we want to append on here our movie title. And after we show the movie title, we're going to open our single quotes back up. We're going to end the first column. Now I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to keep going. Then we want our second column. Now we're going to append on here. The second column. And we're going to open our third column. Put in the length. All of my TD and NTD tags need to go inside the quotes, and all of my variables from the database need to go outside the quotes. Our last field is our URL. Once that's done, we can close our TR. So inside our loop, for every movie in the database, we're going to create a new row. Then we're going to create 4 columns, which are opened with TD tags and closed with NTD tags. And then at the end, we want to close the entire row. So I'll save that and try it out. So this is the result we want. We've got all 5 of our records, and each one has the proper data formatted into the right cell. If we look at the source, you can see here's our table. We've got our 4 hard-coded headings in our first row, and then we have a new row being created for each movie record. So this is how pages like this with tabular data get created. The last thing I want to do is add a bit more formatting to this. So I'm actually going to go back. I'm going to take out this border equals 1. We're going to add some basic CSS. Now, one of the things you may have talked about in your Web and Internet Fundamentals class is using the CSS framework. So there's a number of pre-existing CSS libraries out there that give us sort of a starting point. We can take those, use those classes, and then customize them. And the most popular one, which probably some of you have heard of, is called Bootstrap. So in your browser, I want you to load a tab and go to getbootstrap.com. So if I click on this components link, we can see some of the things that are available and what they look like and how. So for example, if we want a nav bar, which we'll use later, shows us some sample navigation bars and gives us the HTML we need. So what we want to do, and actually I think if we scroll down and look at tables, we'll see if tables is in the list. Under basic template, we can have a look at what Bootstrap includes. So here's their basic theme, so we can see some of these components. You've probably seen many websites that look like this, that use these kinds of elements. So it has some table format. So we can either download the Bootstrap CSS, or we can actually just link to it. They host an online version. So if we click on the download Bootstrap link right in the middle of the home page, and we can simply copy this code into our movies page. So I'm just going to copy that, go back to my code editor, and then up in the head section, I'll make a comment. So we have links to the Bootstrap style sheet now. Now this should probably go down at the bottom. We generally want JavaScript links to go at the bottom of our page. So I'm going to cut that. We don't really need it for right now. And just below my end body, I'll paste it in here. So I'm going to save that. So now my page will automatically inherit the styles from Bootstrap and the Bootstrap theme. So let's go back and refresh and see what happens. So notice my border's gone, my font's changed. Table actually looks worse, not better, but we're going to apply a couple of Bootstrap classes to it. So again, you just go to getbootstrap.com, click Getting Started, and click the copy button right here in the Bootstrap CDN. CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. So all I'm going to do here is add a couple of classes. I'm going to add mine as table, table striped, and table dash hover. So there's spaces between table striped and table hover. Now when I save it, refresh, now notice my table spans the entire width of the page. I get alternating background colors, which is the table striped class. And I get this hover effect when I move my mouse over one particular line. That line is highlighted. So the last thing we want to do with this is we want to turn these links into active links. Right now, I can't click on them, so we want to do that. So we're going to need to put some more wrapping around this movie URL. We want to use HTML anchor tags for this. So in here, I'm going to add an href with double quotes. Over here, I'm going to close my anchor tag. So now in here where my cursor is flashing, we need to inject, once again, the movie URL. But because this is a PHP value, if I type it in here, it's going to be hard-coded. So after, in between my two double quotes, I need a pair of single quotes. And we need to append on movie URL. So again, our href opens with double quotes here. Then we're using single quotes and the concatenate operators here and here to display the movie URL. So we're going in and out of literal text and PHP variables. Let's see how this works. So now when you notice when I refresh, my links turn, the URLs turn blue, and now they become active links, which I can click, and they point me to the right URL. I'll show you that code one more time. Close a few of these tabs off. So there's our href. So we have single quotes at the beginning and the end, the two concatenate operators, and our PHP variable. So now this is starting to look somewhat like an actual web page we might see. Yes, we're still missing the header and footer, but in terms of the data, being able to select the data from the database, being able to format it, present it, make those links work, use some CSS for Bootstrap. This page, a lot of what we've done here, we're going to use moving forward, and we're just going to add on additional features to this page. So I realize this is the first time we've built an HTML table with data from the database. We're going to do it again and again. You'll be doing it in assignment 1, you'll be doing it in assignment 2, and it's something you're going to be comfortable with pretty quickly. So we're most of the way done. We wanted to do a basic select page that would just present raw HTML text on the page. We wanted to do a page that would present data from our database in an HTML grid of rows and columns. The last thing we want to do is I want to look at how do we fill a drop-down list on a web page from a database, which is something we do all the time. So for example, on Blackboard, I might see, if I just look into our Blackboard shell, if I want to copy an item from one course to another, well, Blackboard gives me a drop-down list of all of the courses that I'm attached to, so I can pick one. You'll probably never build a web application that doesn't include drop-down lists that are filled from your database. That's an important thing we need to learn how to do. So let's make one more PHP file. Let's call this select movie. Our drop-down list is what we want to do is fill a drop-down list with a list of movies and have a submit button like we did back in week 2, and then we're going to send the selected movie to the next page and display all the details of that movie on the page. The first thing we're going to need is a form. Set our method as post, and our action will be a page we're going to create called display movie.php. Put on a label. So select the movie. Then we're going to put an HTML drop-down list on below. So we're going to use an HTML select tag. That'll create a drop-down list. And we're going to give this a name of title and an ID of title. And then down below, we'll put on a button. It just says go. won't bother adding Bootstrap CSS to this. This is a pretty simple page. I'm going to save that, and we'll check it out in our browser. This is what it looks like, but so far our list of movies is blank. Now we don't want to type the list of movies. We want our dropdown to be filled with whatever is in our database. So it could be 5 movies, could be 500 movies. So what we're going to need to do in here, inside of our select tag, our opening and closing select tags, we're going to do basically what we've done here. We're going to connect to the database, write a query to fetch the titles, execute that query, and this time, rather than displaying the titles on the page in HTML directly, we're going to fill them into a drop-down list. So we'll put our comment on first. We're going to loop through and add each item to the drop-down. So we'll connect one more time. We'll write the same query we used on our first page. So we just want to select the movie title. Our next 3 lines are identical. We'll create a command. We'll execute the command. We'll store the result in a variable or an array called movies. And at the bottom, we'll disconnect. Now we'll use the same for each loop. So far we haven't done anything differently. The only thing that's different here is what we do inside of this loop. So we want to add each movie title into our drop-down list. So we're going to do it this way. We'll write an echo command. And in here, we want to create a set of HTML option tags. We're going to create an option. Inside of the option, we're going to display each movie title. After, we're going to append on a closing option tag. So this should display, we should get a set of 5 option and end option tags with the movie title inserted in the middle of each one. Let's try it out. So now we've got our movies populating. Our list isn't great. Typically, when we put things in a dropdown, we're going to want to sort them alphabetically. So to do that, we modify this query a little bit. We'll just add on an order by title. We could add ASC for ascending, but that's the default. So if we run our page this way, now our movies are sorted correctly. If I click my Go button, we're going to get a 404 error page because this page doesn't exist yet, our display movie. This is the last thing we're going to do today. So here's all our code. So almost everything we've done is the same as what we've done: connecting, writing the query, running it, storing the results, starting our loop. We're just using different wrapping, different packaging around our server side or data. So we've used a select tag and an option tag instead of table TRs and TDs on this page. The last page we're going to create, we just need to create our display movie page. One more page where we connect to the database and display some data. Here we're going to connect. Actually, we're going to first for the selected movie title. Connect. We'll write the query to get the selected movie. We'll run the query and store the result. And we'll display fields. Selected movie. We'll disconnect. So we'll create a variable called title. We're going to use our post array that we used last week. To get the value of our drop-down list, which is called title. We'll connect. In this case, we're going to have a where clause. We don't want all the movies. We're going to set up a parameter. So we could just inject our $ title variable in here. It's not safe to do so because we may have hackers put in things like drop or delete commands. We don't want to insert those commands directly into our SQL. So by setting it up as a parameter, this colon indicates it's a parameter placeholder. We'll fill it after, and the PDO library will then check for any disallowed words. Now we'll create our command object. But now before we execute the query, we need to fill the title parameter. We're going to call a method called bindParam. So we want to bind the parameter called title. We're going to pass it our value from our title variable up here on line 11. And we're going to set it as a string parameter. If we look in our database, we can see how big it is. Describe command. Our title allows 50 characters. So we'll set our parameter up as 50 characters. We've set up a placeholder with our colon. We filled it from our variable here. Now we can execute the query. This time I'm going to, because we're only selecting a single record, I'm just going to call it movie. We're not going to need a loop. Instead of calling fetch all, we can just call fetch. That'll fetch a single record. Now at the bottom we can disconnect. Now we should be able to print out the values. All on separate lines. So we've got 3 break tags in single quotes. We'll try this out. So I'll go back, pick a movie. I think my syntax is just a little off here. Let's just check it. It should be this way. So the 50 is an optional parameter at the end. So now I can go back and pick any movie, and we can look up and display that movie. So our query is mostly similar. Again, we've used fetch rather than fetch all because we're only selecting a single record, and we're using our parameter to supply the title of the movie that we want.